So there have been 6 days, 6 total days, very recent days, when Cuba wasn't a state sponsor of terrorism. I'll explain in just a minute. It all relates to executive actions or executive orders, EOs, maybe even EAs. One of them was about AI. There have been over 50. One was to rescind 68 Biden executive orders in one, also 11 presidential memoranda. What were all these executive orders? Well, the very last executive order placed during the Biden administration was Executive Order 14143. And you don't need for me to tell you that that one, which was passed on January or signed on January 16th, 2025, provided for the appointment of alumni of AmeriCorps to the competitive service. Just gives people, 23,000 people served in AmeriCorps, a step up when they try to become civil servants as part of the competitive service. So Donald Trump goes in and he rescinds all these executive orders that Joe Biden signed.
A regulatory freeze, as you announced in your speech, preventing bureaucrats from issuing any more regulations until we have full control of this, the government and this administration.
He rescinded Executive Order 14006 and 14007 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13 and 15 and what about 14? What about Executive Order 14014? That one stayed on the books. That one, I looked it up, was blocking property with respect to the situation in Burma. So I guess the Trump administration has discernment. They're still gonna try to stick it to Burma, the current Myanmar. President Trump has issued many dozens and dozens of executive orders. That one about Cuba reversed a presidential executive order signed by Biden less than a week ago, which rescinded Cuba's designation as a state sponsor of terrorism. On January 14th, that was rescinded. Trump comes in, he puts it back on. Remember those 6 days when Cuba wasn't a state sponsor of terrorism? Remember the good feelings that resulted? Now, some of these Trump executive orders are really big. You know about the January 6th pardons. I was wondering if other news outlets were going to cover this with the kind of shock and, shall I say, disgust, consternation that the Gist covered it. From what I've seen, they have. But with all the other executive orders, I don't know how much that will break through. It still could land. The big one as of the last 24 hours was a huge rescinding of DEI policy. And a lot of this was what President Trump promised. But I didn't hear him going back to Lyndon B. Johnson and rescinding what LBJ signed. But that's what he did in his executive orders. I started reading through a bunch of these, and some are big, some are important, some are gestures, some are meaningless, some are following up on slogans, but still just slogans themselves. Here was one. I kind of plucked one from at random. Defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. So this was something he campaigned on, and the verbiage, I will read one part of it, shall ensure that males are not detained in women's prisons or housed in women's detention centers. So I looked it up. There are 1,487 incarcerated men identifying as women in federal prisons, some of whom are actually housed in female prisons, some in male prisons. I guess that they will all be in the prison that aligns with their gender at birth. But as part of this massive, as President Trump or his people define it, this massive defense of women from gender ideologies, there's also a spate of rescinding of Biden executive orders. And so you'll read this Trump executive order, and it says the U.S. Department of Education supporting LGBTQI plus youth and families in school directive, and also the Spanish version of that directive that was assigned and went out in 2021. So I have that directive. In fact, I have it in front of me. I'm looking it up. And what it says is that it's from the U.S. Department of Education to school districts. And it says such controversial things as use welcome and inclusive language It says facilitating opportunities for students to find support from peers, teachers, and staff, such as student-led organizations on campus. Did you know, according to the CDC, when schools implement supportive policies and practices, all students experience less emotional distress. There is also a part that says protecting LGBTQI plus students from book bans that create a hostile environment. And it also says that, did you know, book bans might violate federal rights? And it even advises against bullying. So here's the thing. This was a directive, a letter that went out to schools 3 years ago. And the schools read it. They might have even printed it out and posted it somewhere. Some schools, I'm sure, tossed it in the garbage. Now, the Trump administration has rescinded this. Are they going into the schools and taking it down from the bulletin boards? I suppose that schools under the federal system, such as they are, might have to do that. I don't know what the enforcement arm is. But in general, schools got a directive from the federal government 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago. Maybe it told them things they already knew. Maybe it gave them some good advice. Maybe it told them things they didn't want to listen to. But the knowledge is there. The administrators know it. The actual physical memorandum has been printed out and circulated among the people and in the minds of the people who are in charge. What now? What does it mean to rescind this designation? It means nothing. It's posturing. It's meaningless. But also, in the middle of all this, it's bold. It's big. It's what Trump promised. And it leads to big questions that we on The Gist will be answering in the weeks and years to come.